With both Disney and Marvel already panicking over Ironheart episodes 1 through 3 and the ongoing ratings disaster that it is, there is also way too much focus on the LGBTQ community by the fandom in a negative manner. And it just needs to go away, I think, for a healthy story to grow, and for Riri to really share her limelight with...
Natalie AI thing seems utterly preposterous and ridiculous, and even for an MCU show, I'm finding it to be a little bit of a bridge too far to go. The Heist crew, all lame. Every single one of them, all lame.
And so in this, I'm not sure what they're meant to be, because this character isn't to be confused with Slog.
Slug, our hacker extraordinaire.
Who is also the exact opposite in the same show. I'm really confused.
It deserves your attention. Ironheart deserves your attention. That's how I knew. I was like, oh, they are desperate to get people to watch this show. After I did my reaction, I kept getting, hey, it wasn't that bad. I just watched it. Hey, I just watched the first 3 episodes. It wasn't that bad.
Ironheart might be one of the worst executed ideas ever in the MCU, because under all that garbage was actually potential.
Yeah, and it's like the real Tony Stark, it's like back somehow, and there's like a moment where she's flying through and he's like, who is that? And she's like, I'm Ironheart, Mr. Stark. And he's like, I like that girl. And then he like goes to do something else. Like that would be like the level of something that I think would possibly happen.
Ironheart is back, this time going to an uncomfortable place for viewers.
Ironheart is the biggest L of Marvel of all time. The reactions are just spectacular. Supposedly he's smarter than Tony Stark, bites an electric wire, sells her soul to gain magic powers, uses new powers to steal. What did the writers mean by this? Smoke detector beeps.
I can understand why she's frustrated. That's how I feel watching her interviews.
How do you feel about the impact that she's having on young Black girls? And I'm going to be completely honest, on Black women.
You know, this is yet another area that's getting vibrant. It's getting full in the way that it should be.
Ironheart is practically unwatchable.
This show basically keyed their car, their mom, and in their bowl of cereal in the morning.
They have Dominique Thorne, you know, going out there talking about DEI, LGBTQ rights, and how there's no agenda there, and she continues to do so. But the other thing is that they also had Robert Downey Jr., and they had him roll out and really kind of prop the show up and prop the character of Riri Williams up above Tony Stark.
The newest twist in Marvel's Ironheart saga proves just how fast a simple PR campaign can turn into a studio-wide crisis. The latest reports confirm Robert Downey Jr. is officially pushing back against Disney over how far he's willing to go to defend the series. And it all comes down to a clause in his Avengers Doomsday contract. Ironheart was already in trouble. Viewership data being quietly buried, audience sentiment dipping, and that risky marketing push that framed Riri Williams as a better successor to Tony Stark than Tony himself. So Marvel turned to the man who is Tony Stark. Bring him into the press tour, have him praise Dominique Thorne, and use his influence to calm the backlash. But here's where it gets messy. Downey delivered the interviews, but fans saw through the talking points. Social media lit up with claims that Disney was using him to sell a product that wasn't connecting. And now, this week's update reveals just how high the stakes have gotten. In a recent remote meeting with Bob Iger and Kevin Feige, RDJ was asked to make an even stronger public defense, one that directly tackled criticism and called out bias in the fan base. That was the breaking point. Sources say Downey refused, warning that being positioned as the face of this fight could harm his long-term reputation and undermine the trust he's built with audiences since Iron Man's debut. He's still on board for Avengers Doomsday, but when it comes to Ironheart, the PR strategy may have just lost its most valuable player. This is more than a celebrity disagreement. It's a snapshot of Marvel's bigger problem. The same rescue formula we've seen used on Fantastic Four, Snow White, and The Acolyte is now facing pushback from inside its own roster. And when your most bankable name starts saying no, the real trouble is only just beginning. What's fueling this entire clash is something most fans didn't even know existed, a contractual clause buried deep in Robert Downey Jr.'s Avengers Doomsday deal. This wasn't about script notes, casting approval, or creative control. It was about promotion obligations, a fine print commitment that required him to participate in the marketing of select Marvel projects, even those he wasn't starring in. On paper, it sounded like a safe bet for Marvel Studios. If a future series needed a little boost,
we already know that those out there like Dominique Thorne, the main actress of the show who plays Riri Williams, after really going after fans and really going after the critics, it's only making matters worse for both Disney and Marvel.
they could call in their most bankable name for a few interviews, maybe a red carpet cameo, and instantly elevate the conversation. In practice, Ironheart became the test case, and the test went wrong from the very first move. According to industry insiders, the decision to activate Downey's promotional clause came directly from the top. Bob Iger and Kevin Feige believed that tying Riri Williams to Tony Stark's legacy through Downey himself could transform the narrative. Instead of focusing on the backlash over pacing, tone, and writing, audiences would hear the man who was Iron Man endorse her as the next great Marvel genius. The campaign started fast. Late-night appearances, tightly edited interviews, and glowing sound bites about Dominique Thorne's performance. But what Disney didn't anticipate was how tuned in the fandom had become. Every clip was dissected online, and the verdict was almost unanimous. Downey's delivery felt stiff, rehearsed, and strangely out of sync with the easy charm that defined his real Marvel-era press tours. Behind the scenes, Downey reportedly voiced concerns early on. He was willing to promote Ironheart, but not to the extent of framing it as an unquestionable successor to Iron Man. He'd seen how similar strategies had backfired with other franchises. Fantastic Four's test screening drama, Snow White's pre-release controversies, and the Acolyte's mixed reception, and knew the risks of overpromising on a project that was already polarizing. But Disney doubled down. What started as a contractual favor quickly escalated into a full-blown strategic dependency, and the cracks between Marvel's top brass and their most iconic star were now too big to hide. And that's when the real fight began. Once the promotional machine kicked into gear, it became clear almost immediately that Marvel's gamble wasn't paying off. Instead of rallying fans, Robert Downey Jr.'s Ironheart appearances triggered a new wave of skepticism. The clips were everywhere. Morning talk shows, late-night interviews, streaming platform specials, and yet they didn't feel like the RDJ fans knew. Gone was the relaxed, off-the-cuff charm that made him such a magnetic ambassador for the MCU. In its place was something measured, polished, and unmistakably corporate. Fans noticed the difference. Social media lit up with side-by-side comparisons between his past Marvel promotions and his Ironheart spots. The older clips showed genuine excitement, moments where Downey would go off-script, joke with the hosts, and riff on the character like he lived in that world. The new clips, they read like a checklist. Praise Dominique Thorne. Mention Riri's brilliance. Reinforce that she's the future of the MCU. Repeat. Instead of quelling criticism, it gave fuel to the perception that Ironheart was a manufactured product, a corporate initiative rather than an organic story audiences could get behind. And because RDJ had never been seen as a company line type of actor, the shift in tone was jarring. Longtime fans began asking why he seemed uncomfortable, and speculation about behind-the-scenes tension only grew louder. By week 2 of the campaign, the backlash had reached a tipping point. Comment sections were filled with remarks like, "They're making him say this," and "This doesn't even sound like him." Ironheart wasn't gaining momentum. It was becoming a case study in how star endorsements can backfire when they feel forced. Downey, aware of the growing chatter, reportedly began pushing back on talking points.
The thing about Ironheart is that yes, we do know that the last 3 episodes will be debuting tonight, by the way, really fulfilling the show for season 1, and I highly doubt that there's going to be a season 2, based on the ratings disaster that it is, based on the critics really calling the show out for what it is.
Sources close to the situation claim he started skipping certain cues in interviews and steering the conversation toward more neutral topics, like his upcoming projects and the fun of seeing Marvel evolve. But to Disney, this was a red flag. They hadn't brought him in to be neutral. They had brought him in to turn the tide. And that's when Marvel decided to raise the stakes. The breaking point came during what insiders are now calling the most tense remote meeting Marvel has had in years. It was a closed-door video call involving Robert Downey Jr., Bob Iger, and Kevin Feige. No assistants, no PR handlers, just the 3 of them. The agenda was simple on paper: address the growing Ironheart backlash and finalize RDJ's next round of media appearances. But the tone shifted almost instantly. According to those familiar with the exchange, Iger and Feige wanted Downey to take a much harder stance in defending the series. They weren't just asking for more interviews, they wanted him to directly respond to critics and frame much of the negative reaction as unfair or prejudiced. In corporate terms, they wanted a full-throated defense of both the show and the values it represented. Downey didn't buy it. He'd already seen how quickly this type of messaging could spiral, especially online. Labeling any and all criticism as bad faith wasn't just risky, it was alienating. He reminded them that his connection to the audience had been built on authenticity, not scripted statements, and warned that once fans believe you're reading off a corporate memo, that trust is gone. Sources say this is when the call went from firm disagreement to outright tension. Iger reportedly pressed that this was part of the promotional obligation in his Avengers Doomsday contract. Feige backed that position, suggesting that RDJ's voice could shift the conversation if delivered the right way. But Downey pushed back hard, saying there's no right way to sell a message you don't believe in. He proposed an alternative: focus on Riri Williams as her own character, celebrate Dominique Thorne's work, and steer clear of divisive framing that pits Marvel against its own fan base. It was a measured middle ground, but it wasn't what the executives wanted. They viewed it as pulling punches when the company needed a knockout. The call ended without resolution. But by the time it wrapped, the rift wasn't just about Ironheart, it was about control. Who actually gets to shape the message when the face of the MCU no longer follows the script? And that unresolved standoff would spill into the public narrative faster than Marvel could contain it. While Marvel was still trying to figure out how to get Robert Downey Jr. back on message, Ironheart itself was already sliding into a full-on ratings collapse. The signs were everywhere, and this time, Disney couldn't spin them into a victory. Unlike past MCU shows that launched to big first-week numbers before tapering off, Ironheart's debut was underwhelming from the start. Industry trackers noticed the absence of the usual victory lap press releases. No flashy record-breaking headlines, no streaming hour totals plastered across social media.
Certain is that this is a show that nobody asked for. This is also a show that is based on a comic back in 2016 that was canceled, quite frankly. That's also another fact that people have to realize. But focusing on Disney CEO Bob Iger and Kevin Feige, they are desperately trying to oversell this show to a degree that we have never seen before.
For a studio that once made a marketing art form out of opening week bragging rights, the silence was deafening. Behind the scenes, leaked metrics painted a grim picture. Viewer retention was weak, with significant drop-off after the first 2 episodes. Social engagement, which Disney had banked on as a lifeline, was dominated by debates over the show's tone, pacing, and character direction. Instead of rallying new fans, the Riri as better than Tony narrative triggered pushback from longtime MCU loyalists, who felt the character was being elevated without earning the spot. Even Dominique Thorne's interviews, intended to humanize the character, sometimes made the divide worse. While many viewers respected her talent, responses to her framing of criticism as inherently prejudiced ignited fresh arguments. This only reinforced the narrative that Marvel wasn't listening to fan concerns about story quality and instead was doubling down on labeling pushback as bias. Merchandise sales told a similar story. Tie-in products for Ironheart, which had been produced in bulk ahead of release, reportedly stalled at retail. Collectibles that once sold out within days for other MCU debuts lingered on shelves. For Disney's licensing arm, that was a warning sign. The character wasn't breaking through into mainstream pop culture the way previous heroes had. The numbers weren't just disappointing, they were a signal that the entire legacy handoff strategy had failed to connect. And for Marvel, this wasn't just a single project's bad luck. It was proof that even with RDJ's name attached, audiences weren't buying the message. That's when Disney moved into full panic mode and rolled out a rescue strategy they've used before. Once it became clear that Ironheart wasn't turning the corner, Disney shifted into the kind of emergency response they've now used on multiple struggling projects, a blend of big-name cameos, strategic leaks, and last-minute narrative pivots designed to create a second wave of hype. For Ironheart, the plan was textbook. Step 1. Lean even harder on Robert Downey Jr. to bridge the gap between old and new MCU audiences. Step 2. Inject a surprise character reveal to grab headlines and flood social media with speculation. In this case, the ace up their sleeve was Mephisto, a long-anticipated villain fans had been theorizing about since WandaVision. And not just any casting, but Sacha Baron Cohen in the role, an announcement designed to trend instantly. On paper, this looked like a potential lifeline, Mephisto is one of Marvel's most infamous supernatural antagonists, and introducing him could have set the stage for multiple future storylines. But the execution undercut the excitement. Instead of debuting in a dark, high-stakes project like Doctor Strange, Blade, or Midnight Suns, Mephisto was set to appear in Ironheart, a show already weighed down by lackluster reception and divisive fan chatter. This legacy villain in the wrong place strategy was familiar to longtime viewers. It was the same move used in The Acolyte with Darth Plagueis references.
So let's get into this. Now, one thing about Bob Iger is that we know that I, along with many others out there, like to call him Bob Liger, because all this guy does is lie to the audience, he lies to the shareholders, he lies to anybody out there, in order to really kind of string them along into the following year in hopes that they will stay around, whether it's shareholders or customers. And we already know that Disney Plus is a failing platform.
And the same approach rumored for Fantastic Four's marketing push. In each case, the hope was that teasing a major lore figure would overshadow existing criticisms. But audiences had caught on to the pattern. Instead of excitement, many saw it as a desperation play. Fan bait rather than fan service. Worse, the Mephisto reveal reignited skepticism about Marvel's storytelling priorities. Why burn a high-value character introduction on a show that hadn't earned the goodwill? Why keep tying critical MCU milestones to projects that were already struggling? Even some industry insiders privately questioned whether this was a long-term strategy or just a short-term distraction. The gamble didn't deliver the jolt Disney was hoping for. The conversation around Ironheart remained dominated by underperformance, awkward PR, and RDJ's rumored standoff with the studio. And the more Marvel tried to redirect attention, the more the focus kept snapping back to the internal conflict that started it all. That's when the bigger cracks inside Disney itself began to show. By the time Ironheart's struggles became impossible to ignore, it was clear this wasn't an isolated flop. It was part of a wider pattern inside Disney. Over the last 2 years, nearly every major franchise under the company's umbrella had hit turbulence. The once unshakable Marvel brand was now joined by Star Wars, Pixar, and Disney's own live-action remakes in a string of costly disappointments. Bob Iger's return as CEO in late 2022 was supposed to be the turning point. Instead, it coincided with some of the company's biggest creative and financial stumbles. The Marvels underperformed. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny failed to recoup its massive budget. Snow White's remake stirred backlash before even hitting theaters, and The Acolyte became a lightning rod for divided fan reactions. Across the board, subscriber growth for Disney Plus stalled, and the platform, once positioned as the studio's crown jewel, became a costly problem. Billions had been poured into original content, yet the return on investment was far lower than projected. Executives began quietly shelving projects, scaling back release schedules, and greenlighting fewer big-budget experiments. Then came the layoffs. In what's now viewed as a blunt cost-cutting phase, Disney slashed thousands of positions across Pixar, Lucasfilm, Marvel Studios, and even its theme parks. While framed as a strategic restructuring, insiders noted that many of the cuts hit the very teams responsible for developing and marketing new stories, the same creative core that kept these franchises culturally relevant. At the same time, shareholder influence was growing more visible. Large institutional investors like BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street were rumored to have increasing sway over creative direction, prioritizing certain optics and representation goals that, while well-intentioned, sometimes clashed with audience preferences or storytelling fundamentals. The result was a brand that felt more reactive than visionary, constantly responding to controversy rather than setting the tone. Ironheart became the perfect storm example. It wasn't just a show underperforming, it was a showcase of Disney's biggest pain points.
It is a failing business model for, of course, Disney. You know, we already know that Tony Gilroy admitted to this, the guy who created the Andor series, both Season 1 and Season 2. Disney just doesn't have the amount of money that they have anymore to create all of these shows. However, interestingly enough, with the Ironheart ratings disaster only getting worse for those at Disney and Marvel,
over-reliance on brand nostalgia, top-down creative mandates, and a disconnect between corporate strategy and fan expectations. And the longer this disconnect persisted, the more it threatened the trust Disney had built over decades. For Robert Downey Jr., this wasn't just background noise. It became the deciding factor in how far he was willing to go for Marvel's rescue mission. For Robert Downey Jr., the Ironheart situation had gone far beyond a few awkward interviews or a misunderstood press run. By this point, he was watching a company he'd been synonymous with for over a decade wrestle with a crisis that seemed more about optics and control than authentic storytelling. And for someone who had built his Marvel career on sincerity, both on-screen and off, that was the breaking point. Sources close to the actor say the turning moment came after that tense video call with Bob Iger and Kevin Feige. It wasn't just their insistence that he defend Ironheart more aggressively, it was the sense that they were prepared to use his credibility as a shield for a much bigger set of problems. Problems he didn't create and didn't agree with how they were being handled. Downey began making it clear, both privately and through intermediaries, that his promotional involvement in Avengers Doomsday was not a blank check. He would not be repeating the Ironheart playbook. That meant no scripted talking points aimed at silencing criticism, no forced endorsements of creative decisions he didn't support, and no public statements that could fracture his relationship with longtime fans. This wasn't about Riri Williams or Dominique Thorne personally. By all accounts, Downey respected her talent and the effort she put into the role. The issue was the way Marvel had tried to position her as the direct heir to Tony Stark without giving audiences the organic character development that made Iron Man beloved. He had voiced these concerns early on, and when they were ignored, the fallout was exactly what he had warned about. Insiders say Downey is still fulfilling the basic promotional duties tied to his Avengers Doomsday contract, but every step is now carefully negotiated. He's protecting his personal brand as much as his Marvel legacy. And in Hollywood, that kind of line in the sand sends a message. For Marvel, the message is unsettling. If even their most loyal star is drawing boundaries, the old playbook of calling in legacy names to fix underperforming projects might be dead. And without that safety net, the next misstep could be even costlier. The question now is whether Marvel can adapt before that happens. With Ironheart's disappointing run now cemented in the books and Robert Downey Jr. drawing clear boundaries, Marvel is facing a challenge it hasn't dealt with in its modern era. The possibility that its most trusted stars might not step in to protect the brand when it stumbles. Avengers Doomsday is still on the horizon, and on paper, it's exactly the kind of tentpole event that could reset the MCU's momentum. But the old formula, building excitement through legacy goodwill, surprise cameos, and nostalgia, heavy marketing, may no longer deliver the guaranteed returns it once did. If Downey limits his public support to carefully chosen words, it sends a signal to the rest of the MCU roster. They too can push back if they feel the studio's strategies risk their personal credibility. This is why the Ironheart fallout matters far beyond one underperforming Disney Plus show. It's a case study in the limits of brand loyalty when corporate decision-making overrides creative authenticity. The tension between fan expectations and studio priorities isn't unique to Marvel. We've seen it hit Star Wars, Pixar, and other major franchises under Disney's umbrella. But in the MCU's case, it's especially risky. The interconnected nature of the universe means that a PR misstep in one project can ripple across the entire slate. If Marvel course corrects, leaning back into character-first storytelling and allowing new heroes to earn their status over time, there's still room to regain audience trust. But if it doubles down on manufactured legacy handoffs and scripted endorsements, the gap between studio messaging and fan sentiment will only widen. And once that trust is gone, even billion-dollar box office names like Robert Downey Jr. may not be able to pull it back. So as we head toward Doomsday, both literally and in terms of MCU stakes, one thing is certain: the era where Marvel could count on its biggest stars to follow the studio line without question is over. Whether that marks the beginning of a creative renaissance or the slow fade of Marvel's cultural dominance will depend on what happens next. Because if Ironheart taught Disney anything, it's this: not even Tony Stark can save you if the story isn't strong enough to save itself. If you've been following this MCU shakeup, hit subscribe now, because the next update might change everything.